Hello, party people. My name is Krista Keough, and you're listening to Granted, the podcast that puts the fun in funding. Today we're in the studio with music industry professional Sara Jamer. Sara attended NSCC and St. Mary's University and graduated with her bachelor's degree in business. She's the co-owner of the Syrup Factory and works with artists, labels, management teams, and music events on project management, marketing, and business strategy. We're thrilled to talk with Sara more about her business and her thoughts on funding. So let's roll. Thank you for being here with us today, Sara.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Yeah, this is great. I'm excited. So to start, when I was doing some background, research and things, I learned a lot more about you, which was great. And you graduated from St. Mary's University with a business degree. And so I've always found that, and I've known that about you, and that's really interesting to me because I have a business degree too. So I think we share maybe some of the same approach to our work in music with a business, sales and marketing kind of sensibility, which is really interesting. So when you were at university, were you planning to graduate and then start your career in the music industry?
No. It's funny. I actually did. So I did the 2+2 program.
Yes.
So I did 2 years at NSCC in Amherst doing marketing and then transferred my credits to SMU. And I worked the amount of jobs that I had was kind of funny and where they were was really funny. So I was working in industrial sales, for equipment,
wow.
when selling concrete cutting blades.
Oh my God, that's super different. Okay.
Yeah, when I was in university and I carried that throughout, and then I worked for tech startups and that kind of thing. So no, it wasn't the first thing that I thought of. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I was interested in owning my own company, but I didn't know what that looked like at the time. Okay. I was just kind of experiencing as much as I could.
Well, that's really good.
Yeah.
That's good because I think you feel a lot of pressure. Well, you got to select a major or minor or something like that. So at some point you do start thinking what am I going to do with this degree? So you are the co-owner of the Syrup Factory, and that was founded by Laura Simpson. And you started working there at 2016. So how did you end up meeting Laura and how did this come to be?
Yeah. So my partner's a musician. And when we started dating when I was in university, it was my last year.
Okay, awesome. What does he play?
He plays bass, drums, a bunch of different things.
In a band? Or in a couple
he's a
bands?
session player. So lots of different people. And
okay.
So we had met and, getting to know each other. And I was hearing a lot of things about the music industry and how business was working. And some of the things I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. That concept doesn't make sense. And for me, it was a lot around label deals and people signing to a label and then, the responsibilities of that label and that kind of thing and what it looked like. And some things just didn't really make sense in terms of getting this large sum of money and then being responsible to pay that back or, whatever the case was. Mm-hmm. And so through Jason Turner at the SMU Business Development Center, he had done a music business panel at one point, and I couldn't make it to the event. And so this was all kind of happening at the same time. And I said, Jason, are you doing another one of these events? I'd like to go because I want to learn more about this music business piece.
Okay.
And he said, no, but he said, I can introduce you to somebody that was there. I think you'd really hit it off. And that was Laura.
What?
And Laura had just gotten back from her internship with Black Box out in LA. And so she was just about to start the Syrup Factory. And so I had learned about Black Box and looked up their model, which was a project-based model. And that made sense to me. I was like, yeah, this makes way more sense. You pay somebody for the service. It's not a percentage of the amount of money the artist is making. It just seemed more fair to me as a business student.
Sure.
So Laura and I connected that way and kind of hit it off. And then I started doing project work for her, mostly focused on marketing stuff and branding.
Yeah.
And then, I spent a year in a corporate job. And then Laura said, what's your number? And I left that corporate job after a year.
That's awesome. Okay. So you were kind of doing this on the side, building this business, putting together what the business model would look like.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating. So what were your first impressions of the music industry here in Halifax and like in Nova Scotia?
I mean, I had always recognized the amount of talent that we had on the East Coast. My family was very musical. Like, I grew up with a lot of music. And so I knew that there was an industry here. I didn't really know much, though. But through Laura, I started to learn more. I initially had started working with Christine Campbell because she was kind of like a family friend. And that was my first project in music was I helped Christine raise $25,000 for her Indiegogo campaign for her album. So that was like my first kind of taste of everything.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
That's a really good success to have right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And also pretty innovative as far as, creating revenue, like Indiegogo, that's and Kickstarter and things. So it's a fairly new concept. So that was great that you were able to do that. Wow. Okay. So you've got Christine Campbell. So when you say that you're have a bit of a background in music, like with your family, what does that look like?
I mean, it's really just like growing up with kitchen parties and, like that typical East Coast kind of lifestyle thing of, my dad always played guitar and, always, if there was a gathering at the house, like the musical instruments always came out and everybody always had a good time. Okay. And then just like younger, I mean, like growing up listening to Joel Plaskett and, all the East Coast favorites, it was, the Rankin family, like,
nice. So you
all that
kind
of stuff. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. That's really cool. So was there meaning then in that opportunity to work with Laura and to create the Syrup Factory and build it to what it is now? Like, do you think that, I know this is going off a little bit off topic, but do you think that kind of is where some of your passion or your inspiration comes from?
Oh, hands down. I mean, I think that just Laura herself is an incredibly inspiring person. And I think I'm very fortunate to have learned directly from her because of her attitude. And her attitude's always been artists first because artists are the reason we have jobs, right? Yeah. Like we work in this industry to serve artists. And, I think a lot of the times artists' feelings and thoughts maybe get pushed aside and it kind of turns into that business thing. But at the end of the day, the artists are the business and are the industry. So I've really respected how she put artists first and wanted to serve the artist first and foremost. And I think that was, it made sense. It was fair of like, these are our expectations. This is the set rate. This is what we're doing. Everybody was happy and on board. And as we worked with more and more people, more and more artists were just saying, I like this model. This is the model, that works for me over, because some of them have had traditional management and sometimes that's great for people and some artists that doesn't work for, right? So we were kind of able to fill that gap.
Yeah, that's right. I totally agree with you. I think that is important. We're going to talk about that in a moment too, that there is so much talent. I'm, biased, but I think there's a ton of talent in the East Coast and specifically in Nova Scotia. And what I used to say and say now is it's difficult because artists can't pick their manager, they can't pick their label, they can't pick their agent. So I was like you, where when I started working in the music industry, I came from a marketing agency and I was like, why are there no marketing agencies in the music business? And then I figured, it's because the artist manager does it or the label does it. But what about all these people who want that service to want to do marketing? They don't have the time, or the expertise. So that's really smart. And so to talk about funding for a moment, you offer grant writing services through the Syrup Factory. So can you tell us some of the programs that your clients have applied to for funding?
Yeah. I mean, we don't specifically do grant writing ourselves. Like, I don't call myself a grant writer, but we outsource that often. So we'll have partnerships, with people like yourself who do grant writing and refer artists that way. The majority of the stuff that we're doing is like, through Music Nova Scotia, Factor. CIF has become more common in our world as well.
The Creative Industries Fund.
Yeah. Yes. That's become way more common, especially for businesses like ours. That's the way.
I want to talk about that too, because we know a lot about the artists' funding, I think, with Factor, Canada Council, Music Nova Scotia. But for music businesses, have you applied for funding for the syrup factory, for business development, for marketing, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so we were fortunate enough to get business development funding from Music Nova Scotia for 2 years, which was helpful in just terms of like managing costs of creating websites and branding and, you know, the tools that you need to do business. So that was always, of course, helpful. But then when our first opportunity to travel came up recently, actually, to go to Focus Wales, we weren't eligible to apply for travel funding.
For business travel?
For business travel, which I was kind of surprised about because we're an exporting company. So this was a big learning experience for us. So we're technically export ready. So we met that criteria. But unfortunately, they didn't know what box to put us in terms of management or, you know, whatever, because we provide a lot of different services.
Yeah.
And how a lot of this stuff works is the way it was explained to me was, you know, essentially like copyright and, you know, owning a percentage of something so that, you know, you have rights to something and we'll make money that way, which is not our business. We're not a percentage-based model. We never have been and we never want to be.
Right.
We want to be flat fees.
Okay, so what you're saying is that in order to qualify, you need to have your business set up so that you're getting a percentage of revenue from an artist.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is interesting because I think well, for Music Nova Scotia, it would be, I know that they're building small businesses around intellectual property for artists, but I didn't realize that it was so specific. But I do agree with you, and I think it's something I want to talk with you about because most times in my business, now I've managed artists over time, but most times I've been considered an artist management services company,
right?
Which is a pretty new concept for the music industry if you're talking about decades of it. And when I started, we just talked about like the reasons why, right? You see this opportunity, it makes sense. You start, it works, people like it, they're having success, you're able to find clients. But it is frustrating to me too because what frustrates me the most, I think, is that it feels like it's been hard for the music industry at large to accept artist management services companies. And I think they are very important and have played a role in helping a lot of the artists who we have now who are exporting and export ready to get to that point because we're serving a very real need, very similar to artist managers, very similar to record labels. But I think you're right. The difference is we aren't taking a percentage. We're project-based. We ask for fee. There's a start and end date. And you may continue with an artist for a year or 2 or 3.
Yeah.
But that's the idea. So why do you think this is this way? Why is it so hard for people to include us in their drop-down menus?
I know.
Right?
I know. I had a lot of feels and I had to meditate a lot on that whole thing because it was frustrating to me because we do have ongoing relationships with all the artists that we work with. Like, you know, we've been working with Ben Kaplan for going on 3 years and Christina Martin for 2 and Gabrielle Papillon for 2. You know what I mean? Like these aren't, you know, there's definitely projects where we work with an artist once and then they find a manager, they find something that fits and that happens.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like the larger artists that we're working with, we are an ongoing basis and we are doing things to help them further their career. Like many artists we work with won't go to a conference without us doing representation because they like having somebody represent them and we've made successful business connections and we have proof of all this stuff. But because we're not taking a percentage of their music, you know, and this kind of thing, then we don't fit. And it really makes no sense to me, you know, because at the end of the day, the artist is becoming more successful. And isn't that what we care about? Like, why are we so set and, you know, on these little percentages of things that just, it just doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. And, you know, you talked about like the industry kind of being like resistant to these like management services companies. And it's funny because the larger labels are using management services companies. You know what I mean? Like that's what like Black Box, which is an artist services company, is used by Warner, is used by, you know what I mean? Like all the large labels to increase their capacity.
Well, and I was thinking that too because I thought maybe it's because the artist managers don't like it. And I'm like, what am I talking about? I worked with Sherry Jones for 5 years plus, and that was great.
Yeah.
It worked out really well because I was able to take on a portion of the work that needed to be done so that she could do other things. I mean, that's kind of
Totally.
the nature
And
of
have
the
a
business.
larger client roster, I'm sure. And you know what I mean?
Yes,
one
exactly.
person, one manager can't successfully serve,
That's right.
10 artists without help.
I totally agree with you. And looking back, that was a huge part of it because we started with 5 and then took on 3 more and had conversations about, okay, well, if we do this, it's going to mean so much more work and that kind of thing. So and I want to touch on this too, because when I mentioned the drop-down menu, you had posted on the Syrup Factory Facebook about the survey that's going around that Sound Diplomacy is doing.
Right.
Now, I believe that this podcast will be released after the survey is complete, but there's ongoing work until October. People can sign up to get, notifications of that, so we'll include that. But I ran into that then. The first, page of the survey is please choose one of the following that best describes your business. There's nothing. What do you literally can't choose anything. You can't choose record label. You can't choose artist manager or publisher or agent. All these things.
Yeah.
So what is it going to take, do you think, for this to be accepted? And
I mean, it's as simple as changing guidelines in a policy. And, I can understand, I understand that they want that percentage, and that kind of thing. But it's at some point you have to understand where the industry is going and how it's working. And I know, I've heard of people that have participated in programs like the Passport program. Right. Are you familiar with that? Which is typically geared towards artist managers, I believe, or it's a business education thing.
Right.
But I guess a lot of their messaging was focused on service companies are the way of the future. Hiring out and doing these service providers is the way of the future, which is kind of funny because I'm why can't we just be there now, right?
Yeah.
And it's definitely hard as a business that's trying to expand and trying to grow in this area to not be able to get business travel funding to help support an exporting trip. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That's hard,
yeah.
right? And, and I say well, we do publicity. Can I be a publicist then? Can I list my company as a publicist? Does that work? And the answer's no. And I'm okay, why not? Right? I just keep asking the questions, and I haven't received really a solid answer on why it can't happen.
Yeah.
And we actually have I know somebody in Toronto that had a company similar to ours.
Yes.
And I actually called him when I was told I can't get funding, and I said, "Have you run into this? What's the deal?" And he said, "Sara, I've been through all levels of government. I've been to factor offices. I've been everywhere trying to advocate for this, but because it's intellectual property, we're not going to win." And I was just oh, okay. So I think there's people out there that are trying this, but I really don't know what the answer is other than just keep doing what you're doing and do it yourself and invest in yourself if nobody else will. That's kind of the attitude I have now. If I can't get the investment and the support from, the provincial bodies and that kind of thing, I'll just keep doing it on my own, I guess,
Well, I think that is it. You just keep going and you get creative with how you're doing business. I guess in a sense, because we come from business worlds, we both know that there are tons of businesses in other types of industries that don't have this kind of opportunity. So I think for you and I, we were kind of set up from the beginning, this is how you run a business, you generate profit, blah, blah, blah. And then it was okay, well, in the music industry, I remember learning about funding was wow, this is a huge bonus. It's necessary. I understand why it's important and I like it. And then just kind of carried on about my business as well, kind of accepting early on that, okay, this is something that is going to take a while for people to understand and see the value in. But I'm surprised now, but I'm hopeful that people like yourself and Laura have stuck with it, and just like you said, you just keep doing your business, you have your successes, and then hopefully over time, more people who are at this Passport Summit will be speaking to the benefits of it too, and more people will just be accepting, because I think it is the way of the future. I really do.
Yeah. And I think, if artists need the support. And I mean, I just helped organize a panel that I couldn't actually be at because I was sick at ECMAs, which was crushing.
Yeah, that's right. Congratulations on your win, by the way, on Company of the Year.
So yeah, I mean, we had organized a panel that was building the team, that you want and that you need, and how it might look different for every artist. And it does look different. And, we talk about like kind of the joke that Gabrielle and I joke about all the time is like managers are like magical unicorns. Like they're really hard to find. It's hard to find that right relationship. So if you have people that can like fill in those gaps for you, then you're still going to move forward and you're not going to be stuck in one place, right? Because you do need that team to start expanding.
Yeah, and it's very business minded, that approach is like, okay, well, you have things that you need to do, and this is what businesses do. They hire out to other people to have services done that they need. And then, that kind of thing. My
biggest thing from when I started working with Laura, the way that I've always, and this isn't going to sound like the most creative thing, but because I come from that business background and because I did a lot of work with entrepreneurs, every time I look at an artist, I say, you're an entrepreneur. You are the business, right? So whether that's Christina Martin, right? Like Christina Martin is Christina Martin. That's her company. And she runs it like a company. And that's kind of the way I think artists should be thinking about their business is like, you are a company and you have to do these things. And how are you going to do them, right? So anytime we work with artists, I'm always thinking of it kind of like a business of, you're providing songs and you're doing these and you have to sell these things. And you know what I mean? And then you need people to do things for you and build it out that way.
Yeah.
That's always been
and that's super important. And it's great, too, because I think, and I've seen this with clients, and you probably have, too, where once you're involved and you're part of their team and you take on these projects, it's so nice to see them feel the relief of that and then be able to focus on songwriting and performing, what their live show is going to look like, the real creative stuff that they set out probably to want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
When it comes to funding, what do you see missing, either for artists or music businesses? What are some of the bigger challenges, and how can we solve them? Big question.
I mean, it is a big question. Like I see a lot of artists apply for funding and get rejected, and I see how soul crushing that can be. And so I'm always, it's the emotional side of this is also really hard for people. And I really struggle with seeing people go through that. But my biggest thing is like I remember first looking at grants, like when I first started, right? Grant, business plan, perfect, like straightforward, right? Coming from a business background. And I actually was on a jury once, and I was kind of saying it was my first one. So I had like a lot of questions, right? So I was going, what's the standard here? Like, what are we looking for? And come to find out there really isn't a lot of like quantitative, like, this is what makes a marketing plan 100 in this industry, right? Yeah. And so my biggest thing, and after seeing, like artists that we work with have grants come back with feedback and that kind of thing, or scored low or whatever, and you're learning from all of that, kind of looking at the feedback, I'm like, there isn't, I just don't feel like there's really quantitative things that are telling artists, this is what makes 100 and this is what you strive for, right? So like when they ask for a marketing plan, there's no details on what should be included in that marketing plan. It's just a marketing plan, which I find so funny because then I go, well, I'm from a business background. I could ask, 100 of the people I graduated with to give me a marketing plan and they'd all look different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? They'd all have different metrics. People would approach them differently. Yeah. And so for me, it's like, you can't really grade an application unless there's some kind of uniformity and somebody saying, this is what 100 is, this is, 50, this is, you know what I mean? Like,
I do.
You need to have that breakdown, especially for people that are scoring, because I mean, you have to remember a large part of this is also on music, right?
Right.
So like you have those categories on musicality and lyrics and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And I kind of go, well, I love music and I have my opinions on what music is good and what music isn't good. But am I a qualified person to rate somebody from 1 to 20 on whether or not this song is great? Like, I kind of say no. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think that art, music is art, and it's kind of up to the listener and it's up to the creator on what that sounds like. So to me, like, I would want to see some changes on how we're grading these applications and what's the important piece, right? Like, I think that it's very focused on, at least through Music Nova Scotia, for example, very focused on revenue, which makes sense. Sure. But also, like, if you're giving somebody money for a project and they have these goals, if they've accomplished those goals, then I think that's what should be focused on. I don't necessarily think it should be a dollar amount or how many sales you made or how many streams you made, or how many likes and followers you have on a platform where you can buy those things. Like, these metrics that we have, to me, aren't really valuable. It goes beyond that. And I think that we need to kind of overhaul the whole system and how those things are being weighted and awarded.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense. You're right. Because you and I probably both have worked with artists who fall outside of the typical kind of applicant who would make a great fit for Music Nova Scotia or Factor. Like, when I'm thinking of it, I think about someone like Al Tuck. Now, I worked with him years ago, and we did a record together. And I just know that if the criteria were the same then as it now is today, I think he would have had even a harder time, because I haven't seen the numbers, and maybe they're fantastic, but, Al is the type of artist who's not super into social media, promoting himself in his shows, creating a brand, doing this kind of business stuff, right? But his music is gorgeous and beautiful, and everybody people love it. So I think that I think you're right in pointing out that we're probably missing a lot of people if we're not willing to, first of all, help them achieve what they need to write a great grant, which is even giving questions, like, or a template or something, and then how we score them. So what are we looking for? What really matters? How do we quantify this? What are the expectations?
Yeah, because that's not really, it's so open-ended. And so you have too much leeway there on how you write something that you can't really, put that into like a nice uniform and be like, okay, compared to this one, you know what I mean? Like, there's no real comparison there.
Well, and also I feel like because we're in Halifax, a lot of us know each other.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't take long. And it is the worst, because you and I had a conversation about an artist who was going in for funding. And I remember we had a really great, it was a big chat about, okay, here's what I think people are going to think about this artist.
Right.
And I think that's going to maybe hold it back. Maybe they've been independent, or they haven't released records quick enough, or, whatever the case.
Right.
And I think that is unfortunate and does a disservice. It's like, you can't ignore the fact that people are going in there with preconceived notions of these applicants already. So I've been a fan of the idea of, like, opening it up and having people from all over the East Coast, like people in PEI, jurying applications for Music Nova Scotia or something. Like,
and I think that, even though, is still too close. Like, on the East Coast, like, I forget who was telling me about this. Somebody was telling me about, I think it was like one of the Northern Territories, they actually hire people from other provinces to review all the grants.
Oh, wow.
And I just think that's brilliant, because then you don't have that, you don't have those judgments in your head.
Yes. And you can't help it sometimes. You just know these people.
Exactly. But, like, also, people make mistakes.
Yeah, and people
that's
change.
Okay. And people change.
And grow.
And they grow a huge amount. Like, releasing your first record versus releasing your fifth record, it's going to look pretty different. And if we can't, give people room to grow and, like, move on from a mistake that they may have made or whatever, then nobody's going to get anywhere. And I don't think that's fair.
Yeah. We put a lot of weight on the emerging artists and the first record they make and the second. And, we try to foster their growth and development, but sometimes I feel like it might be stifling because I've even had artists say to me, like, they want to rearrange their release schedule for their record and the timing of everything because of a grant deadline or something, right? And it's like you have to have these real conversations of, okay, what is best for this project? And then make decisions based on that. And it's hard to convince people to do that because with factor funding, and then when you get up to Radio Star Maker funding, it's a lot of money. Yeah. It makes a big difference. Yeah. To get $30,000 or $40,000.
Totally.
So that's a little tricky too. So I guess on a final note, I mean, what are you hoping for in the future for your artists, for the Syrup Factory, in saying all these things?
That's a good question. I genuinely hope for a world where we're, putting artists first and we're not looking solely at metrics of likes and follows and that kind of thing. Like, yes, those things have a place and they're important to some degree, but I think that we're basing too much worth on those types of numbers. And this is coming from somebody that does like digital marketing. Like that's, like that's what we focus on. But you at the end of the day, you have to be connecting with real people and real fans. Otherwise it doesn't mean anything. Right. So, I mean, I just hope that we can continue to be more transparent with the grants and how those are being juried and how they're, judged, because I think we need to, and I think that we need more standards on those types of things. It just, because otherwise, it's really lopsided in who's getting money and that kind of thing. Right. So yeah, like again, artists first and, being more transparent, hopefully opening up to business services and realizing that we provide value to artists. We have lists of artists that will say that. And I think it's really important. So I think that we just need to continue to innovate. Like we were talking about the tech sector before we started, right? And you think about how quickly changes happen in that world. And I find in the music industry, sometimes we can be really slow to those changes. And
you're right, which is bizarre because things around us are changing so rapidly.
Exactly. And think about all the tech companies that are in music now. Like, you know what I mean? We have to be able to change quickly. Otherwise, you're going to be behind. Yeah. And we also want to have power in what that music industry looks like in the future. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah.
This is awesome. It was so much fun to chat with you. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me. I know it goes by really fast.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you like to listen to podcasts so you never miss a new episode of Granted. Produced by Krista Keough and John Mullane at John's Studio in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Follow us on social media. We are at Granted Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And you can follow us on Twitter at Granted_podcast.